Josh Hammer, and this is The Josh Hammer Show. Much going on in the world, as always. Another horrific transgender act of violence. We will get to that momentarily. Secretary of State Marco Rubio continues his highly successful diplomatic ventures overseas. Speaking of overseas, the latest meetings between the terrorist regime in Iran and the United States of America taking place earlier today in Geneva, Switzerland. What is going to result from this meeting? My guess, frankly, not a whole lot. Lots happening, as I said, plenty of that and more in today's episode of The Josh Hammer Show. But for now, we begin with this. Will there be a Supreme Court vacancy this summer? Is a question that I find myself frequently pondering. And I'm pretty sure that I am not pondering it merely because I am a lawyer by background and clerked on a federal court of appeals and generally think and care just a lot about the Supreme Court and the federal judiciary. No, I think that I'm thinking a lot about it. If I can be a little meta here for a second, I think that I'm thinking a lot about it because there is a very, very real chance that it is going to happen. Frankly, looking around the conversation inside and outside the Beltway, I am shocked. I am positively shocked that this is not something that is currently being discussed more. Let's be clear. There currently are a lot of folks on the left who are talking about this. There are a lot of liberal legal bloggers at all the usual suspect publications who are starting to raise the possibility that maybe there will be a Supreme Court vacancy. They've kind of been doing a bit of a whisper campaign, perhaps, for weeks now. The rationale for this is a little obscure, but my best guess is that they think that by their dimwit blogging, that there is a small chance that perhaps, just perhaps, they can try to forestall or maybe outwit one of the two more likelier justices of the Supreme Court to resign. Those justices would be Clarence Thomas and Sam Alito. So there are some liberal bloggers, as I say, on the left who are talking about it. I don't really understand why they are. Frankly, if you idiots think that you're going to somehow affect the decision-making process of heroes of the Republic, Clarence Thomas and Sam Alito, then you frankly are a heck of a lot stupider than I or anyone else thought you were. But there's very few people on the right talking about this, and I find myself deeply, deeply surprised by that. The basic situation is as follows. Clarence Thomas, otherwise known as the single greatest living American, that's what we call him because that's what he is. His life story is positively inspiring. He was the subject of a wonderful, wonderful documentary film produced by Michael Pack that I saw a handful of years ago, talking about his origins growing up in the Jim Crow South, becoming the conservative icon that he is. He is genuinely, truly a hero. But Clarence Thomas, at this time, is currently 77 years old. This June 23rd, he will turn 78 years old. Far be it from me to tell the greatest living American, one of the greatest justices in the history of the Supreme Court, that he should retire. But it is simply worth observing that this summer will mark 3.5 decades. Yes, literally 3.5 decades since he began his tenure on the U.S. Supreme Court back in October of 1991, back when he was a nominee of President George H.W. Bush. Similarly, Sam Alito, who's my personal favorite justice, at least when it comes to their actual jurisprudence, to their approach to constitutional law and constitutional interpretation and just judicial statecraft in general. Clarence Thomas, great living American. Sam Alito is my personal favorite jurist for reasons that are a little too obscure to get into on today's show. Sam Alito is currently 75. He will turn 76 years old on April 1st. He has been on the Supreme Court. This year marks 20 years, so it will be 35 years for Clarence Thomas, and Sam Alito just celebrated his 20th anniversary serving on the Supreme Court on January 31st. He was a nominee of George W. Bush. Recall at the beginning, George W. Bush actually floated the possibility of nominating Harriet Miers, his deeply unqualified personal lawyer. Ultimately, back then, there was a lot of backlash. I was in high school. I wasn't involved, but a lot of conservatives freaked out about this whisper campaign. Ultimately, we, the American people, got Sam Alito, and what a tremendous success that has been. Now, let's just cut to the chase here. I think the odds are very high, that one, potentially both of these men will resign this summer for a handful of reasons. One is, do not overlook the symbolic nature of their various anniversary tenures on the court. Again, Clarence Thomas now this year will be on the court. This is 35 years this October. Sam Alito just had his 20th anniversary. Those are nice, clean, crisp numbers. There's something deeply symbolic potentially about resigning. The whisper campaign, furthermore, when it comes to Sam Alito, and I don't particularly like to go in these sordid whisper campaigns, especially with someone in whose immense esteem I hold, like Samuel Alito. The whisper campaign for years now has been that he was frustrated with his tenure on the court. Now, as conservatives have started to win more high-profile recent cases in recent years, maybe those personal frustrations have dissipated, but really just reading between the lines at some of Sam Alito's more fiery writings over the past number of years, whether it was his dissent in the transgender Title VII case, the Bostock case of 2020, whether it was his dissent/concurrence in a religious liberty case out of Philadelphia a few terms ago, wherein he devoted 75 to 80 pages calling for the overturn of a 1990s era statute, or 1990s era precedent, called Employment Diversion versus Smith. Whether it's that writing or the other writing or this or that there, sometimes you can read a Sam Alito writing and his frustration just kind of leaps off the page. Furthermore, and this is kind of really what has gotten these liberal bloggers all excited. It's worth noting that Sam Alito has a book scheduled to come out this October. The publication date is October 6, 2026. To be clear, you absolutely can, and many justices actually do, write and publish books while they are serving on the court. Amy Coney Barrett has done that. Neil Gorsuch has done that. It's definitely not unheard of. But the nature of the date, the Supreme Court term goes typically from October to the end of June, first week of July at the most. So the fact that there's a book, the book is called So Ordered, an Originalist View of the Constitution, the Court, and Our Country. This book by Sam Alito is scheduled to come out on October 6th. The October nature of that start date has definitely attracted a lot of attention in the speculation circles as well. But the math and the prediction possibility, and the reason why I think that at least one, possibly both, frankly, but at least one of these men will resign this summer, is really ultimately the final case is as follows. The Republicans should keep the Senate this fall. It is a midterm election year, though. It is the first midterm election since Donald Trump got back into office. And we've already seen now in any number of other elections, including many, many special elections throughout the country, including most recently this Dallas-Fort Worth area state legislative seat in Texas, we see when Donald Trump is not on the ballot, Republicans tend to underperform. That's just the reality of the situation. Now, to be clear, the map is so good for Republicans in the Senate this fall in 2026 that you would think that even the Republican Party, which, to paraphrase Abba Eban, the former Israeli diplomat, to paraphrase him, Republicans never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. But you would think that even with this map, Republicans will not lose the Senate. However, as we know from John Steinbeck, the best kept plans of mice and men often go awry. And indeed, I think that there is increasingly a chance the Republicans actually do lose the Senate. I don't think it's going to happen. Most prognosticators don't. But through the grapevine, there is increasingly another whisper campaign from the NRSC and various other Republican Senate campaign organizations whispering that actually it really is a possibility that they could lose the Senate. Who knows? I don't think it's going to happen, but it's possible. So if you are a Clarence Thomas or a Sam Alito and you're looking at that, don't you want to resign? Where you have President Trump and a Republican Senate, you have Republican control of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Don't take it for granted, by the way, that even if you go through next January, if Republicans hold, let's say they lose seats, let's say it's a 51-49 margin. Really? You want to bank on every single member of the Republican caucus continuing to vote for your nominees, where you can't lose a single vote? Not a good wager. Whether it's Tillis or Cassidy, McConnell, some of these guys are retiring there. The point is, there are a lot of squishes. Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski. You don't want to bank on all these guys. John Curtis, the new senator of Utah, Mitt Romney's replacement. Not exactly a stalwart conservative. So I do think you're probably going to get a resignation at the end of this term. That's going to happen at the end of June, more likely in the first week or two of July. That gives Republicans the month of July, probably the first half month of July, to solidify their nominee and to develop a game plan. There is the annual, then, August recess. This is a midterm election year. Congress and senators will go home to the districts, they will campaign for re-election there, and they will generally disappear out of the swamp to go back home like real normal working Americans. They will then return after Labor Day in September, if I'm right, and we will have a very high-profile or two Senate Judiciary confirmation hearing. That exact calendar that I just laid out, by the way, is what happened to Brett Kavanaugh. So in the 2017-2018 Supreme Court turn, you had Anthony Kennedy, who resigned promptly after the term ended toward the end of June, first week of July. Kavanaugh was fairly quickly determined to be the nominee. They go home for recess in August. They get back in September, and what do we see? Well, we see the Christine Blasey Ford information operation of the century, and ultimately we got Justice Brett Kavanaugh. That is more or less the time frame and more or less the calendar of them talking about. Far be it from me again to advise that Clarence Thomas or Sam Alito resign. They are the two greatest justices on the U.S. Supreme Court by some order of magnitude. Frankly, none of the three Trump nominees, whether they're Justice Gorsuch, Barrett, or Kavanaugh, are even in the same conversation, arguably not even in the same stratosphere as Alito and Thomas. I am simply saying that if you are being as risk-averse and cautious as possible, that this is as good a time as any for one of, potentially both of them, to step down. They're not going to live forever, as much as we would very much love them to both live forever. That raises the obvious question as to who is the nominee going to be? Well, if you go to Kalshi, which is one of the betting predicting markets, you see right now the top three listed candidates, according to the bettors, at least on this one marketplace, are Judge Andy Oldham of the Fifth Circuit, Judge Multh Thapar of the Sixth Circuit, and Judge Jim Ho of the Fifth Circuit. I know all three of these men. In fact, I actually clerked for Judge Jim Ho. I was one of Judge Ho's first four law clerks back in 2018. He indeed is my personal preference if there is one vacancy on the court. Judge Ho years ago clerked for Justice Clarence Thomas, so there is some symbolism there of replacing Clarence Thomas with one of his former clerks. Andy Oldham, for what it's worth, clerked for Sam Alito. So one would think that he might be the odds-on favorite to replace Sam Alito if indeed Alito retires. Other names that are oftentimes thrown out there, John Sauer, the Solicitor General of the United States, maybe Judge Aileen Cannon, one of Trump's favorites here, a district court judge in Florida. Plenty of other options as well. But mark your calendars, folks. I've been wrong before. I've been wrong plenty of times. But if I'm looking at the Senate math, if I'm looking at the actuarial tables, and if I am just making a straight prediction, I indeed am going to predict there's going to be a high-profile Supreme Court showdown in the U.S. Senate roughly around this Senate. Get your popcorn, because if I'm right, this is going to be an amazing spectacle and, frankly, a huge political boon for Republicans in this midterm election year as well. Folks, stay with us. We'll be right back after this break. Just a quick finishing thought on our previous conversation about the U.S. Supreme Court and how I think that there's going to be a massive SCOTUS showdown or two later this year. The final thing that I want to just briefly elaborate on is this is not just arguably, I would argue, probably the best thing to happen for the future of the court, assuming, and this is a massive assumption, that Republicans don't mess it up when it comes to judicial nominations, as they have had a horrible, horrible habit of doing for well longer than I have been alive. But assuming that you go with some of these excellent names, Jim Ho, Andy Oldham, John Sauer, others there, assuming that, yes, this is probably the best thing to do for the long-term future of the court, as amazing as Clarence Thomas and Sam Alito are. But the additional point that I want to just briefly emphasize is this. In this midterm election year, when currently, we see the headwinds. We see the headwinds Republicans are facing all throughout the country. We had Eric Erickson on yesterday to talk about it. Historically speaking, Republicans get shellacked, absolutely shellacked in their first midterm election. Yes, the economy is looking like it's getting better. Yes, inflation went down to 2.4% in the latest report last week. Yes, jobs were growing abundantly in January. Yes, energy prices are falling. Plenty good indicators. At the same time, you can't just overlook all the special election results happening throughout the country, where Republicans are essentially losing virtually every single one. They're getting just absolutely shellacked in New Jersey, Virginia, all these races that should have been closer, frankly, than they are. There is really not a better issue to gin up Republican enthusiasm than a high-profile Supreme Court confirmation fight. In the 2016 election, when the seat to fill Anthony Scalia, who just passed away, was on the ballot, that seat was ultimately filled by Neil Gorsuch. In the exit polls that year in 2016, they showed that the Supreme Court was the number one issue, that got Donald Trump across the finish line over Hillary Clinton. A lot of folks say it was immigration, the economy, foreign policy. Actually, no, believe it or not, it was the Supreme Court. All those other issues were close, but it was the Supreme Court. There are very few things historically that Republican voters care more about than the Supreme Court. So the politics of this, frankly, in a midterm election year also make a lot of sense to me. In other news, another just horrific transgender shooting. Horrific stuff happening in Pawtucket, Rhode Island yesterday. So a man who we're not going to say his name, is a general habit of not saying the names of these absolute horrific freaks on this show. This individual decided to take a gun at a youth hockey event and shot himself and his baby mama, his son's mother, and then his son as well, and also injured three others. This during a youth hockey game between two local Rhode Island hockey schools. The individual had massive strife and conflict with his father-in-law, who freaked out when he realized that his son-in-law was starting to identify as a female version of his name. There's this sick, twisted photo that's been going around on the internet of this clearly mentally ill man wearing a dress with a baby, or it's a fake baby. It looks like a doll. Can't even tell there, feeding a milk bottle. And here's the kicker. As if you need a kicker to make the story even worse. If you look at this guy, he's got like a Hulk Hogan, like massive, like fat wrestling style arm. I think he's just overweight. You look at some of these tattoos on there that are bulging out of the fat on his upper arm there. You see a Nazi insignia. He has an SS logo, like the SS, like the Nazi killing squad, the secret police, with a skull and bones there. This is eerily familiar to what happened in Minneapolis last August. So what happened in Minneapolis last August, there's been so much out of the Twin States of Minnesota, you might have forgotten about this. What happened last August was there was a horrific shooting at the Annunciation Catholic School and Church there in Minneapolis by another deranged transgender shooter. And very similarly, that individual who shot the Catholic Church, if you go back and you look at the manifesto and what this sick freak wrote on the barrel of his rifle and stuff, there was a lot of anti-Semitic, pro-Nazi writings and musics. So, look, Charlie Kirk, my late friend, Charlie Kirk referred to Jew hatred as a mind virus. He referred to it over and over and over again. There's something to be said for the fact that these clearly mentally ill transgender individuals who are going to go on these rampages, and this is the second such rampage basically in a week. Just last week on the show, we were talking about the horrific transgender shooting in the tiny rural community of Tumbler Ridge, British Columbia. An 18-year-old ex-student, a dude who thought that he was a chick, shot up the school, killed his parents. Horrible story in British Columbia, Canada last week. So, but increasingly, whether it's this terrible Rhode Island shooting, whether it's the Minneapolis shooting there, you see this connection between the mental illness of gender dysphoria, something that, again, and we will not hide this, we will emphasize this however much we need to do. For decades and decades, the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual of Mental Disorders, which is essentially known as the guidebook, the Bible for the psychiatric profession in America, for decades, gender dysphoria, otherwise known as psychologically thinking that you are the other sex, that your gender does not align with your sex, to use the Orwellian speak of modern gender theorists. For decades and decades, it went without saying, it was not even questioned, the DSM, that gender dysphoria is a mental illness. They have since toned down the rhetoric on that, although, as discussed previously here on the Josh Hammer Show, what's interesting as well is that you're now getting the AMA and various other medical associations that are starting to pull back the reins a little bit as we see the proliferation of these successful medical malpractice lawsuits. So a lot going on there, but the point is, folks, for decades, gender dysphoria was recognized as a mental illness. And we now see that when you succumb to the mental illness of gender dysphoria, for which we obviously have compassion and we want to get psychological counseling, mental illness is a real thing. It's a real, under-discussed, terrible thing there. It's really sad, and we hope that everyone gets the help they can get. But it's not shocking, is my point, that folks like the Minneapolis shooter last August or the Rhode Island shooter now, who succumb to the mental illness of gender dysphoria and think that they are something other than what they are, that these folks also succumb to the mind virus of anti-Semitism. Here is the local sheriff in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, speaking on this absolutely horrific shooting at the hockey rink earlier this week.
As for the suspect, can you confirm whether the suspect's a male, female? We've heard that is a transgender person. Is that something that you have in terms of information?
So what I can say right now that we have identified the person, the suspect, by a birth name. The birth name was Robert Dorgan. We have also learned that the person does go by the name of Roberta, also uses the last name of Esposito. But again, that will be all confirmed throughout the course of the investigation as to their status. That really doesn't have anything to do with the investigation.
So you clearly see there the awkwardness that the sheriff is talking about, the fact they don't want to get in the fact there's another transgender shooter. By the way, just to underscore how insane the whole transgenderism gaslighting operation is there, It's something a little related, but we want to play this for you. Go ahead and look at this clip from Sarah McBride. You might have forgotten that Sarah McBride exists. First openly, quote-unquote, transgender person ever to serve as a state senator. Tragically, is out also now in the U.S. House. Here was Sarah McBride this past weekend at the Munich Security Conference. Watch this clip.
And a strong man's greatest asset is scarcity. When there is scarcity in jobs, when there is scarcity of opportunity, they pick boogeymen, or in this case, boogie people, and they blame them.
Oh, yeah, boogie people. Because that's how normal people talk. Boogie people. Look, I thought it was important to make a light of what is otherwise a tragic situation. The point, though, is this. This is not going to stop unless and until we commit ourselves to stop bestowing societal legitimacy on the notion of being so-called transgender. Again, that is not to say that we don't have compassion for the actual historically DSM-recognized mental malady of gender dysphoria. That is very different than saying that it's okay to think you're transgender, and it's actually even better than okay to go ahead and chop off your genitals and think and do that chemical castration, and you should be a hero, rewarded. No. Historically speaking, some things deserve stigmatization. Stigmatization, historically, is a very, very, very powerful tool for personal and social rebuke and ostracization. It is a lesson, as Anthony Scalia himself, go back to the court topic, Scalia said over and over again on his decades in the court that the rule of law serves a powerful role when it acts as stigma enforcer and rebuker. He was talking about the homosexuality debate, same-sex marriage and all that there. So too, though, is it even more important today when it comes to the so-called transgender phenomenon. Unless and until we start treating this as mental illness, we're going to get more and more and more of this. That's a tragic, tragic reality. Folks, stay with us through the break. We'll be right back with more on the other side. Marco Rubio continuing his journey through the European continent. So he gave this absolute barn burner of a speech at the Munich Security Conference in Germany this past weekend, the defining speech of Marco Rubio's already historic tenure as jointly as Secretary of State and National Security Advisor. Can't forget that second role, by the way, for whatever it's worth. Marco Rubio also then going into the heart of the European continent, to Central Europe, where he made a pit stop in Budapest, where he did a press conference with Prime Minister Viktor Orban, the controversial, I suppose you would say, Prime Minister of the nation of Hungary. Marco Rubio saying very warm things about U.S.-Hungarian relations and also about Viktor Orban on a personal level. For instance, here was Marco Rubio speaking in Budapest, Hungary earlier this week.
We want you to continue because we want this economy to prosper. We want this country to do well. It's in our national interest, especially as long as you're the prime minister and the leader of this country. It's in our national interest that Hungary be successful. It helps America, and obviously it helps you.
So Rubio throughout the speech just really affirming the Orban-Trump relationship. So Viktor Orban, in case you don't follow this closely, and there's really no reason why you would, is considered to be a very controversial figure by the international media. He was viewed as something of a pariah by both the Obama and the Biden administrations. He has been warmly welcomed by President Trump now both times in office. Orban's been the leader of Hungary for about a decade and a half, give or take there. He's the leader of a major right-center party called Fidesz, which is very much a nationalist conservative party there in Europe. I've actually met Viktor Orban numerous times. I've spoken at a couple of conferences in Budapest over the past few years. For a while there, Budapest was bringing in a lot of American conservatives, a lot of Western European conservatives, basically trying to see what was happening there, try to get a sense as to what was happening in this country. I actually left very, very impressed by Viktor Orban, someone who studied at Oxford, who devotes hours, not an entire day. I believe it's Sunday. I think he takes one day a week to not follow necessarily super closely the day-to-day current events, but really kind of to do a deep dive in political theory. Like he actually really reads like the art of politics. He's a very, very intellectual, cerebral guy. Very, very different than his depiction by the corporate media as some sort of a tyrant or fascist or illiberal leader there. And it's really nice, frankly, to see Marco Rubio going to Hungary, which is a second-tier country, certainly in Europe in terms of importance. It's not an Italy or Germany or France or a UK. It's not even a Poland or anything like that there. But it's a country that is sort of something of a source of inspiration for many other nationalist conservative movements all throughout the world. Giorgia Meloni in Italy, who is the highest profile conservative leader currently today of a European country. Query, it's an open question whether or not Giorgia Meloni actually could have gone into power in Rome, in Italy, were it not for the example set by Viktor Orban. So one of the keys of Donald Trump foreign policy is to bring together this coalition of proud nationalist leaders. Again, Hungary is a smaller country there, but Japan is not. We were talking last week with Steve Yates of the Heritage Foundation about Sanae Takaichi, who is viewed as the Iron Lady of Japan, the Margaret Thatcher of Japan. She has this whole nationalist, conservative, very right-wing agenda. And Japan is not a small country. Argentina with Javier Milei, Argentina, not a super small country either. Smaller than Japan based on population, but bigger than Hungary. So this is the basic idea, is that for the problems today, if you believe what Marco Rubio said in Munich this past weekend, that one of the major problems of the 21st century is globalism and transnational ideology, this attempt to stamp out and to vanquish in the name of universalism all the various things that make us human in the first place. National identity, tribal identity, religious identity, our families, our faith, etc. If you believe that the globalists, and yes, there is a real globalist class. Davos is real. The World Economic Forum is real. Brussels, the EU, it's real. The United Nations, Turtle Bay, it's real. It's all real. So you believe that one of the foremost challenges that we face today in the 21st century is this transnational globalist attempt to homogenize us in the name of quote-unquote progress, and to stamp out our national differences, that it makes sense that a robust alliance of nationalist leaders stands to be a worthy foil to that. By the way, don't sleep on India. India was actually in Donald Trump's crosshairs, unfortunately, for a while last year due to their importation of a lot of sanctioned Russian oil. It seems that there's been a recent rapprochement, a thorning of tensions between Narendra Modi, who is the national conservative Prime Minister of India, the world's most populous country. There's been something of a rapprochement between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump. That is wonderful news, not just good, wonderful news when it comes to the establishment and the realization of this international nationalist movement that I'm kind of getting at here on the one hand, as well as just Chinese Communist Party containment on the other hand. Just a bit of contrast. Marco Rubio, as you likely know, is not the frontrunner for Republicans in 2028. The frontrunner would be J.D. Vance, but Rubio is definitely at this point second in the 2028 Republican presidential hopeful category. On the Democrat side of the ledger, just a point of contrast, one of the individuals who's always mentioned, she's not the frontrunner, would be the John Lennon of the squad herself, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Now, the favorite for the Dems is probably Gavin Newsom, but AOC is definitely up there. How exactly? I don't know. Frankly, I lick my chops at the possibility of Republicans facing AOC in 2028. But compare what we've seen from Marco Rubio on the international stage past few days to AOC making her much heralded international debut. She infamously just botched this question in Munich when it came to China and Taiwan. Watch this one.
Would and should the U.S. actually commit U.S. troops to defend Taiwan if China were to move?
I think that this is such a, I think that this is, of course, a very longstanding policy of the United States. And I think what we are hoping for is that we want to make sure that we never get to that point, and we want to make sure that we are moving in all of our economic research and our global positions to avoid any such confrontation and for that question to even arise.
Tell me a moron without telling me you're a moron. Really? I mean, could that have been any more of a Kamala Harris word salad? I mean, if Kamala Harris is the queen of the word salad, maybe Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is the princess of the word tiramisu. I mean, insert your analogy of choice there, but that was just a flaming load of hot, stinking, flaming garbage. That was just freaking awful. Can she pinpoint Taiwan on a map? It really makes you wonder. Unbelievable stuff. Well, frankly, folks, if AOC or Jasmine Crockett, if one of these absolute morons is the Democratic nominee in 2028, then frankly, you have to like Republicans' chances virtually no matter who Republicans put up as their nominee. I feel very similarly about Kamala Harris for whatever it's worth. Gavin Newsom, a slightly more formidable foe, not because his policies don't stink. They stink big time. But because he just looks the part and talks the part, and he's dazzlingly handsome, as all the liberal media just fawn over themselves to tell us there. And frankly, a lot of Americans, tragically, not me, not you, we vote on policy, substance, we care about politics, we care about policy. A lot of folks don't care about any of that there. They just vote on looks and superficial crap. I fear Gavin Newsom, but really, AOC, my God, I don't fear AOC really in the slightest at all. Folks, also wishing you a happy Fat Tuesday. Mardi Gras. I was at Mardi Gras in New Orleans myself many years ago. I was there only one time. I believe the year was 2012 when I was quite a bit younger. My brother actually went to college, went to university in Tulane, so I paid him a visit and timed it to be during Mardi Gras. So I got to experience all of that. Wishing all of our Catholic friends also a very solemn and meaningful Ash Wednesday and a meaningful Lent period as well, leading up to Easter on the calendar. It's a very interesting time, actually, on the religious calendar because there's something of an overlap between the Christian calendar and the Jewish calendar. So last night and ending tomorrow night is the 2-day new month. So we call it Rosh Chodesh, the beginning of the new month. And this is now the month of Adar. On the Hebrew calendar is a popular Hebrew saying that when Adar enters, we increase our joy. Supposed to be happy in the month of Adar. The Jewish holiday of Purim comes up in about a week and a half, 2 weeks. It is the holiday affiliated with the book of Esther, the old story of Esther and Mordecai in the court in Susa on the salvation of the Jewish people through the dethroning of Haman and the evil tyrant Achashverosh, who is commonly viewed historically to be the same as the character Xerxes. In any event, wishing all of our Christian friends a wonderful and meaningful Lent. To my fellow Jews, I wish you a Chodesh Tov. May this month of Adar be indeed a very joyful month. For what it's worth, my wife and I are probably going to sign on a new home sooner rather than later, God willing, and we hope to increase our joy very much so in that respect as well. Folks, stay with us through the break. Dr. Douglas Howard of Balanced Nature joined us. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Dr. Douglas Howard next. Welcome back. So one of the themes of our show is we care a lot about personal health and public health. We've talked about the Maha movement numerous times. We wanted to bring on today Dr. Douglas Howard to discuss it. So Dr. Douglas Howard is the founder and formulator for Balance of Nature and also the Fruit and Vegetable Foundation. He joins us now. Dr. Howard, we really do appreciate it. Dr. Howard, I want to begin just by touching briefly on your personal story and indeed your prescience, as the case may be here. Maha is a big theme of the public discourse. I live in a household very much characterized by Maha. My wife is very much in on this agenda, and we are trying to implement it when it comes to our little 14-month-old young one as well. But you were ahead of the curve. You saw this coming years ago. What did you see, and what are you seeing today when it comes to the advancements in public health and Maha more generally?
Well, I'm so excited about Maha right now. It is like a fruition of my dreams as we came forward. To go back in my history a little bit, it's a long story. I'll make it short. But I started working in a hospital when I was 14 years old. For 6 years, I worked there, and then I got my medical degree and my chiropractic degree in multiple different hospitals. I actually went to Russia to study for 4 years, was the Dean of Foreign Student Affairs there, so that I could broaden my scope. And it's there where I truly had 4 years to practice without reference to money, insurance companies, workers' comp telling me what I needed to do or how to do it. It was to get them well with whatever means I could, the fastest and the best, and do the least harm and the cheapest. And so I got to practice with no reference to money all that time. And I learned my heart and soul. And that's what the Maha movement is moving towards, that to me. And I love that it's about health. It's not about sickness. It's about health. And that's where we need to concentrate.
Dr. Douglas Howard is the founder and formulator of Balanced Nature, also involved with the Fruit and Vegetable Foundation as well. Dr. Howard, there have been recent changes to the old school, decades-long food pyramid. This is one of the many things I think is coming out of Washington, D.C. here. Why don't we just talk at more of a macro level about how we've had a bit of an evolution in recent years and recent decades about ingredients and how one should actually go about his or her diet and thinking about what to consume and put in their body on a daily basis. How do you see the evolution in that space?
That is one of the main things. I don't know how you pinpointed. That's one of the main things that pulled me away, is because I was in practice for about 3 years when all of a sudden the suggested amount of vitamins and what you should be taking changed. And I had been working, and I wasn't a huge vitamin guy. I didn't eat a lot of vitamins, but I knew they were important somewhere in that picture. And when it all changed and shifted, then I was like, wait, so what I've been recommending was wrong. And so, okay, I got back into that. Okay, well, now this is the new recommendation. It changed about 2 years later, and I went, wait, it was wrong again. So I've been telling them wrong all this time. And then I thought, this is just going to change again in a couple of years, and I'm going to be telling them wrong again this whole time. So I moved away from that a lot. And I thought, okay, I can't trust that because it's going to be ever changing. One of those was vitamin A. I don't know if people remember back in one a day vitamin. I probably can't say that, but what they used to be, not they are today, but all vitamins used to have vitamin A in them. And it was taken out because we figured out that it was actually causing cancer of the lung and of the prostate and the breast. And so you don't find vitamin A in your vitamins anymore. You find beta carotene, and they turn vitamin A into a drug that you put on your face to kill acne and make your skin peel off of you. Anyway, so this road took me down to finding, actually, while I was in Russia, we started learning more and more about, I started learning more about phytonutrients or phytochemicals. And that's all the chemistry within the plants that we eat and how that works together. I didn't have to invent the plants. Somebody with a much greater knowledge than I did that for us. And I realized that chemistry is there. I was still looking for a vitamin or something. And then it hit me one day of, I'll be dead and gone by the time we find this magic chemical I'm looking for. And then I started seeing combinations and realizing there's hundreds of thousands of chemicals in our fruits and vegetables. That's the color and the smell and the taste that makes that up. And so anyway, I started down that and understanding this, the orchestration. If I can, there's one more small example I'd give. And that is, in pharmacology, I learned what you're learning to weigh the benefits of a drug versus the side effects of a drug, benefits versus the damage, basically. And I had a great professor who taught me every chemical has an effect and a side effect, and you've got to weigh that out. Every isolated chemical. And as I learned more, that even meant the vitamins, and that truth came to fact through, for example, the studies of vitamin A and other things. And these chemistries are so important, but within their natural environment, they're orchestrated with thousands of other chemicals that buffer off the side effects. So you can eat an apple and have that chemistry in there that if you extract it, it has this effect, but it has all of these negative side effects. But when you have thousands of other chemicals that then fight that side effect that would have caused, then with time, I'll say it took God himself to create this. And I just had to figure out a way to put a variety of fruits and vegetables together and maintain all of that nutrition, all of those chemicals with damaging them as little as possible and without processing it to death.
Dr. Douglas Howard, again, folks, is the founder and formulator of Balanced Nature and also the Fruit and Vegetable Foundation. Dr. Howard, why don't we extrapolate this conversation a little bit here? I think most of us intuit how a healthier diet can help us live longer lives and generally just feel more vigorous and full of life and full of energy as individuals. But can you tell us a little bit just about the broader societal benefits when individuals en masse start to consume healthier products?
Oh, yeah. In fact, that's for 30 years. That's the studies I've been doing. inside the U.S. and outside of the U.S. But another major aspect of this is what I developed in practice, and it's called the triad of health. Most people are going to think, oh, yeah, I know this one. No, you probably haven't heard the way I'm going to state it. And it's so exciting of what Maha is doing, because it's down this road exactly. But in triad of health, you have a chemical side of health, and you have a physical side of health, and you have a spiritual side of health. Now, for those who are offended by spiritual, I'm not saying a religious side necessarily. I'm saying, I think some people call it mental. Some people call it other things, but I call it spiritual because I do happen to believe in God and that there's a much greater force to all of these things, but it still fits for anybody. Let's take that really quick down the road, because this chemistry side I'm talking about is only a piece of it. That doesn't create complete health. But for example, just really quick, when you were 14 years old, you probably liked somebody a lot, right?
Me? Oh, sure. Yeah, of course I did.
Yeah. Anybody out there, you probably liked somebody.
Sure.
And you know, there was this girl in school that I was really attracted to. And when she walked around the corner one day, and I wasn't expecting her to walk around the corner. Now, something like this maybe happened in your life, that all of a sudden, poof, somebody's there. What reaction did you have? What reaction did you feel something?
Oh, of course you do. Naturally.
Yeah, but she didn't touch you. He or she didn't touch anybody, right?
No, but it's just, you just start to notice. You feel it.
Yeah. So what you had was maybe it wasn't a spiritual thought, but you had a thought that caused a chemical change in your body that caused a physical feeling. Those three things have to be treated on every aspect of health. And when I heard RFK talk the other day about spiritual health, I was so excited, because that is my drive, is to drive all three sides of this to health, because most of our health problems can be either alleviated or either completely destroyed out of our lives, or at least minimized in our life.
No doubt about that. Doctor, you've been very ahead of this curve for many years now. You deserve a lot of credit. Folks, go ahead and check out, by the way, these supplements, balanceofnature.com, and taking them, I feel like $1 million. Dr. Douglas Howard, unfortunately, we're out of time. We really appreciate you joining the Josh Hammer Show today. And folks, for all of you listening and watching, have a great rest of your evening. We'll be right back here tomorrow.